Very good morning and good afternoon to all our dear viewers and listeners outside there. Welcome to another edition of ACFIM Talks, brought to you by Alliance Finance Monitoring, a political finance watchdog. ACFIM Talks runs every Friday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. East African time. My name is Abel Esero and I'm sitting in for Mr. Felix Kafuma, moderating today this show. Before we proceed, kindly subscribe and like all our social media platforms. On YouTube, we are ACFIM On Twitter, follow us and like our handle is ACFIM and on Facebook it's also ACFIM Today we are going to be looking at the role of media exposes in curbing corruption in public institutions in Uganda. The reason why we try to look at why media is trying to do this is because recently we have seen how corruption has become so rampant and the media has played a key role in exposing some of this. So before we proceed, I would like to give a brief background on why we think media is so essential in trying to curb corruption in public institutions. First of all, the media is an essential component of any democratic society. This is because on one hand, it provides information which the politic requires to make responsible and informed decisions, while on the other hand, it performs a checking function, ensuring that the elected officials uphold their campaign promises. In this case, the National Resistance Movement promised to launch a war against corruption in Uganda. So conversely, media improves domestic accountability by putting issues that directly concern the interests of citizens and public institutions on both public and political agenda. Specifically, investigative journalism is one of the tools that can be used to uphold or hold state institutions and government officials accountable for their actions or inactions. Recently, Uganda's Inspectorate of Government, Ms. Betty Kamia, ordered more than 2 dozen of staff of Uganda Bureau of Statistics to refund nearly Uganda shillings 800 million. The officials claim to have spent on field work during the COVID-19 lockdown. This comes after Daily Monitor, a local newspaper, broke several stories on the questionable handling of Uganda Bureau of Statistics resources. Currently, corruption in Uganda's public institution has become so endemic, and annually the country loses about Uganda shillings 20 trillion. That's about 5.2 billion in dollars in corruption, as the Inspectorate of Government survey report indicated in 2021. So today I'm going to be joined by two journalists who have a very good background in the area of media and reporting and also exposing the issues of corruption. I will be joined by Mr. Moses Mulondo, who is currently serving as the president of Uganda Parliamentary Press Association. Mulondo holds a degree in mass communication and masters of business administration, both that were gotten from Makerere University. He is also the New Vision's leading senior staff writer on the issues of the national budget. Mr. Mulondo, you're welcome.
Thank you very much, Mr. Eseru Abwe.
We shall also be joined by Mr. Pius Mutekani Katunzi, who is a lawyer and writer. He's a journalist who has been practicing journalism for over 25 years. He is also the managing director, stroke editor of the Observer newspaper since 2019. Mr. Pius has not yet joined us, but we expect him to join us shortly. So I will start with you, Mr. Mulondo. Despite the
Yes.
central role of media in democracy and accountability, media organizations in Uganda have not been investing enough in stories on corruption and malfeasance. Why has this been the case in your view?
Okay. Thank you very much. First of all, I think we need to be fair to the media because much of the corruption that has been exposed in this country has been exposed by media houses. Of course, there are some limitations in the course of us doing our work. One of which is that the many media houses do not have enough operational funds to undertake such big projects, especially when it comes to investigations. And that's why many of us have been advocating for public financing for the media. We are called the fourth estate. Journalism is a public good which should be accessed free of charge or at a highly subsidized rate. So in Uganda and many other African countries, the media houses do not get enough funding. Actually, not only Africa, the world over. Even in the UK, the Guardian newspaper was almost closing, and it had to resort to public donations for its survival. So many countries actually give subsidies to the media, even in the USA. The other thing that happens in the USA, which is not in many other countries, that they have rich foundations which contribute money to the media houses to make them more autonomous, more independent financially to be able to do their watchdog role. Between 2009 and 2011, foundations in the US contributed about $3 billion as donations to media houses. In Uganda, we do not have such entities that can help media houses, and that is why many of us are pushing for public financing for the media. The same way money is put in the national budget to fund political parties, including opposition political parties. We need money to be put in the national budget to fund the media, to make the media more independent and more vibrant in executing its cardinal mandate of the watchdog role. That said, of course, like I said in the beginning, the media industry in Uganda has played a very fundamental role in exposing so much corruption that has been going on in many government entities. Of course, it is one thing to expose, and it is another thing for action to be taken. And it is not only, of course, the media that exposes. There are many other players that have been exposing corruption. Parliament plays a very fundamental role, especially accountability committees of Parliament. But even committees that are not accountability committees, sectoral committees, like in the recent past, the Sectoral Committee of Trade and Industry, which is headed by Mpaka Mwine, has exposed a lot of corruption in Solot Sugar, Solot Fruit Factory, a lot of corruption in many other entities. But it investigated the Vinci Coffee deal. So Parliament plays a very fundamental role, the committees of Parliament, in exposing corruption. You've seen what Kosase has been doing, you've seen what PAC has been doing. But of course, the other dilemma is that in the course of fighting corruption, so there are many incidents of members of different committees of Parliament being compromised, and you've seen those reports where uh, members of Parliament are accused of getting bribes from different accounting officers that they are supposed to hold accountable. Civil society, like ACFIM, play a very fundamental role in fighting corruption. I have seen a number of reports ACFIM has released on especially political financing, on holding political parties accountable in regard to the funds that they receive. And so many other players, whistleblowers in these different entities, government entities, they help us to expose corruption. Actually, yesterday was International Whistleblowers Day for celebrating people who volunteer information to the public to expose the bad dealings that are going on in the entities where these people are working. Much of the corruption that, of course, is exposed by the media is from these whistleblowers that tip us and tell us there is some corruption happening here, and that corruption is exposed. But also, There is so much corruption that goes on unreported. There is so much corruption that happens behind the scenes, and the public never gets to know. Even the media never gets to know. Like I told you in the beginning, that the media in Uganda needs some empowerment, especially financially, but also training. And we need civil society groups and different entities that have experience in fighting corruption to build the capacity for the media in taking the battle of fighting corruption to another level. As I conclude on that, we also have to think about the environment in which we are operating. Our political environment is highly corrupt. A big number of our politicians thrive through corruption, through bribery, through deals. Actually, our politics is highly commercialized because many people who thrive, they use colossal sums of money for them to go through. I have seen a number of reports that actually ACFIM has released on this, on the commercialization of our politics. And when you, for a person to become a member of parliament, I saw the reports indicating that someone has to use between 300 and close to a 1 billion shillings. Where they get all this money, certainly this is money that this is money. Let me put my phone in silence. This is money that in most cases is obtained through fraudulent ways. And so when you have such people getting into leadership positions, it becomes extremely difficult for them to fight corruption. You and sometimes, by the way, like you said in the beginning, that we lose about 20 trillion shillings to corruption every year, according to the IGG's report. That is a lot of money, and it could even be understated. For us to be able to make some serious progress in the fight against corruption, of course, it would have to take a political will from those who are in government. You saw what happened in Tanzania when Magufuli became president of Tanzania. Magufuli undertook a lot of radical measures to curb corruption, and reports indicated that the money that was saved from the money that was going to corruption and wastage, it caused the development budget for Tanzania to rise from 26% to 48%. Tanzania was also able to undertake a number of infrastructure projects, including their standard gauge railway, on their own money without going for loans. So you can imagine a lot of progress can be realized when a country succeeds in fighting for corruption, especially when there is political will. When there is no political will, even the rate of exposing the corruption that goes on will be very limited, because it becomes greatly highly risky to expose corruption. I'm sure you know. So that's what I can say on that question, Mr. Eseb. I'm waiting for more questions.
Thank you so much, Moses. You talked about media is a public good, and one of the things that is limiting media to do its work effectively is finances. But when you look at the state-owned media, people expect a lot to come from them, because at least some of them they do get some resources from government. And
That is a very good one.
people are
And
questioning people are questioning, why is it that most of the exposes that we are seeing on media is not coming from state-owned media, it's coming from private owned. Why is that the case? Why is the state
uh,
media not doing its work effectively in terms of exposing corruption in public institutions?
I would say yes and no. To some extent, yes. Of course, as far as New Vision is concerned, where I work, I don't know so much about UBC, but as far as New Vision is concerned, New Vision has exposed a lot of corruption, and I think New Vision should be commended that whereas it's a government newspaper, it has exposed a lot of corruption that goes on in different government entities. But of course, even from what many studies have indicated, there are limitations for state-owned media in exposing corruption because you know that their editorial independence is very weak, is very limited. They are controlled by these very powerful people in these government entities who are corrupt. So many times there are stories that never see the light of the day when they had already been worked on and they are about to be published, and some calls come in and the stories are never published. So, to be realistic, of course, there are always limitations for state-owned media in exposing corruption because the corruption that is exposed in most cases it relates to people who are powerful in government and they have in most cases a lot of influence and control over state-owned media. But I can tell you, as far as New Vision is concerned, I am sure you know you have seen a number of reports, a number of exposures of corruption going on in different, and actually many times we've had a number of New Vision journalists who have been kidnapped by some powerful people in government, and some have even been threatening to sue us. These reports have been there. So New Vision has done a lot of commendable work in exposing a lot of corruption that goes on within government entities. But like I told you, and according to so many studies, there will always be limitations for state-owned media houses in exposing corruption. But even private media houses, they have a lot of limitations. They are those who are within government who are corrupt can always interfere with their work. You remember how for so long Monitor was denied adverts from government entities because partly they were exposing a lot of corruption that was going on in government entities. So even private media houses, there is a lot of interference coming from authorities within government entities as they do their work, and that's a very common problem, not only in Uganda but in many other countries.
Thank you. You talk about something that is so touching in terms of those powerful individuals and also the editors especially are not independent and they don't sometimes do their work independently because there are some other forces that come into play to try to influence or hamper their work. For example, we have received various reports that some stories can decide to be killed by either those editors are bribed or they are threatened. How big is that problem in the media industry?
In countries like ours, of course, developing countries where even democracy is at the infancy stage, where good governance is also work in progress, such incidents are so many. Those interferences are so many, and like I told you, media houses here depend a lot on adverts from government, and without those adverts, they can only crumble. So, but also there are many other powerful players who are not government necessarily, like private companies, multinational companies that give adverts to the media houses, and if they have any illicit transactions or deals that are not in the interest of the public, sometimes the media, including the private media, may not be able to expose these dealings because of such factors. So that is why many of us continue to advocate for public financing for the media, because if we have public financing for the media, that would greatly promote the independence of the media and giving them the capacity to even fight such powerful players that are responsible for their economic survival. If money is put in the national budget to fund the media, it will greatly help us in this fight against corruption.
You've touched on the question of how some of the journalists are sometimes threatened and or kidnapped. I want to know from you in terms of accessing information, especially related to corruption. I know it's a very hard task sometimes to access that information. How are journalists maneuvering through all the hurdles that they face, they find in on ground, and each time they're trying to access corruption-related information from these public institutions?
That's why I told you in the beginning, by the way, that so much corruption goes on and it never gets reported, partly because of the intricacies in accessing information in different government entities. I can give you an example, even if for you, Alliance for Finance Monitoring, you have a mandate to follow up on the finances that go to political entities and how these funds are utilized. I am sure you have found so many hurdles in accessing accountability reports. I remember one time I hosted your executive director, Henry Guzi, and he was recounting on how they had faced difficulties in accessing information that is within the files of the electoral commission, because political parties are supposed to file accountability reports to the electoral commission. So when you go, even as the media, we have many times attempted to access this information and we failed. So you would wonder why the electoral commission does not freely share this information, because political parties are public entities that are supposed to be accountable to the public, and their accountability reports, their financial reports should easily be accessed by the public. But also, I have not seen any single political party, whether those in the opposition or the ruling party, that has freely released its accountability reports to the public to take to raise a high standard for accountability.
Mm.
So see, those are the challenges that we have. Access to information in different government entities is still a very big challenge. But I think it's an area that we need a number of discourses on how to go about it, because it's even against the laws of the country. We are supposed to have access to this information that is within the public entities, but many times we make attempts and we fail, and that is why I told you that a lot of corruption goes on, and it is the public never gets to know.
Thank you, Moses. Now, there's one interesting thing which I want to know from you, because I know corruption, especially investigating corruption and reporting on corruption, is a very risky job for journalists and media organizations. And we have seen, as you already hinted on earlier, the issues of like they can threaten you and they kidnap you, even in certain cases they can do away with your life if you're a journalist. I want to know from you whether media organizations in Uganda have mechanisms on how they are helping journalists and also themselves as organizations in mitigating some of these threats and attacks from those they or public institutions or public officials they do investigate.
Um, the mechanisms, which mechanisms? Of course, the the protection that we have is that these corrupt officials fear to be exposed, and in as much as they can issue threats, they know how powerful the media is. There is an American philosopher, Malcolm X, who said the media is the most powerful entity on earth. The media has so much power. So, um, in the course of these people making these threats, of course, they know the repercussions, and that is why many of them, the methods they use are actually to compromise. That is the main tool they use. When they get to know that you have a story you are working on that is going to expose them, they can call you or engage your bosses to ensure that the story never comes out. It is under very limited instances that they would do that they would use the threats. So in most cases, they will try to compromise you and give you money, and you sit on the story. Or if they fail to convince you, they go and engage your bosses, and the story never sees the light of the day.
So have bosses tried maybe in terms of if they see, because that is likely to compromise the independence of also media institutions, because the public expects the media, which is like an eye, their eye, the eye to the public in terms of seeing and exposing some of these corruption cases. If they get to know that now the media organization colludes with some of these corrupt officials and the story is killed, have media organizations tried to resist some of this because there are some of these powerful forces that come in and try to ensure that any story that comes and tries to blackmail them or depict them as a bad institution, the story is killed. What has media done in terms of ensuring that such things don't happen
By the
again?
way, I need to tell you that the media, in most cases, is even when the either editors or writers are approached, they have always gone ahead to publish these stories. And I can tell you, like in Parliament, where I am, I have seen many instances where an individual or entity that is being probed makes an attempt to compromise journalists in the way they will be reporting on that story. And many times, journalists have rejected those pleas from those entities or individuals to cover them, to cover up, and they have exposed them and chosen angles that expose the dirty dealings that went on. So the media naturally plays a very fundamental role of watchdog, of carrying out oversight, of exposing the wrong dealings that are going on, because we are the eyes and the ears of the public. For us, we have played our role as the media with some limitations notwithstanding. But I can tell you, as a country, we are not making progress in fighting corruption, especially because those who are in authority have not done enough. And I have seen international reports indicating that we are actually worsening as a country in our ranking. I saw the Transparency International report. We were put in position 144 out of about 180
Right.
countries that were assessed. Even on the African continent, the average score was about 33 points, but Uganda's score was only 22 points. So that tells you that certainly, going by those reports, Uganda is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. And we are losing a lot of money that would be going towards improving the lives of the ordinary Ugandans. Sometimes, some few years back, Catherine Babugemeire did some investigations about money that is sent to UNRWA, which for so many years has been getting a big portion of the national budget. And in their report, they indicated that about 90 trillion that had been allocated to UNILA for roads, out of 90 trillion, 4 trillion had been stolen. And the report indicated that the 4 trillion was stolen out of connivance between government workers and the contractors. And so you can imagine 4 trillion out of 90 trillion. So there is a lot of corruption that goes on. I remember former Minister for Ethics and Integrity, Dr. Uturu, once said if we could end corruption that is going on in government entities, we would not even need to borrow money for government activities. We would be using our own money, which to a very great extent Magufuli had achieved in Tanzania when he had successfully fought corruption. He reduced the rate at which Tanzania was borrowing. For us now, our public debt has reached 73 trillion, which is a lot of money, and increasingly the biggest portion of our national budget goes to debt repayment. There is too much borrowing, but if we could reduce corruption, we would not be borrowing at that rate. So as a country, it's a very big challenge that we have, but majorly the ball is in the hands of our political leaders, those who are in parliament, those who are in the executive, the president, and these cabinet ministers. Because even the anti-graft agencies that we have, like IDG, Auditor General, they have released so many reports and implicated so many officials and made a number of recommendations for action to be taken, and action is never taken. I remember there was a time Parliament even passed a resolution for some accounting officers to be sacked after they had been involved in so many corruption scandals, after they had failed to account for colossal sums of money. But the appointing authority never sacked these accounting officers and they continued to serve. So even as the media, we've exposed a lot of corruption in different government entities, but action is never taken by the relevant authorities, especially the executive, to purge and put things right. And that is the very big challenge that we are facing as a country.
Thank you, Moses. We are going to go for a break, and then we shall return with the next segment.
So, Madam MP, I'm so honored to have you on this interview. So, for starters, how does it feel like being an MP? I want you to take me through your scope of work in this office.
So you really want me to take you through my day, how I spend my day?
Sure.
Let me start with office. Actually, I think this is something better. Why don't I hand over my office to you for something like 2 or 3 days?
That will be perfect.
It will be perfect. So when will you be free?
We can do it now.
Now? I'm going to hand over my office to you for 24 hours.
Okay.
Right. This is a list of the calls I'm expecting today. These are the phones. You make sure you note down everything.
Okay. Have a good day.
Have a good day too.
Yes, please, Officer for MP. Yes. Please, I'll call you back. Hello, Officer of the MP. How may I help you? Yes. Which place is that? Oh my God. How much? 40. My God! Is this what she goes through?
Oh, whatever. Thank God you're back. I can't do this anymore. But we agreed for 24 hours. What does that mean? I don't know how you do it. Let me just Have you got enough for your story?
Enough. I got more than what I bargained for. Thank you so much. Please.
Voters redefined the work of an MP. I buy food, I pay for burials, I pay school fees for so many, I pay hospital bills, I buy seeds and donate.
What? Why? Tell people the bitter truth.
They don't want to know.
Do your job.
Which is?
Make laws, protect the democratic government, oversee the implementation of the government programs.
They don't want to.
When will you ever put service before politics?
Tell voters I'm a politician, not a Rotarian. They should stop that begging culture of theirs.
Stop imposing such overwhelming demands on your MP. The statutory role of an MP is to perform legislation, oversight, budget approval, and representation.
Contribute today at www.politicalfinanceafrica.org/donate.
Welcome back from that break. We are trying to look at the role of media exposes in curbing corruption in public institutions in Uganda. And Mr. Mlondo, before we went for the break, you were trying to tackle how some of the stories or cases that are exposed, the corruption cases exposed by media, are not. There's no action that is taken upon by the relevant authorities, and this is one of the issues that is challenging to the media, because I feel that it keeps on demoralizing most of the journalists who keep on reporting, and nothing is being done by the relevant authorities or the persons who are supposed to take action against those they get, those who have been implicated in corruption cases. So for you as a journalist, what would you advise government? Because if something has been exposed and there is evidence that someone or a public entity or an individual has engaged in corruption, this is causing government to lose a lot of money which would have been used for development of the country. What advice would you give to the authorities that are responsible in terms of effecting an action against some of these individuals?
You know, that is a very good question, but which is very hard to answer, because, you know, sometimes maybe to take a regime change for us to see some radical changes. Like I told you what happened in Tanzania. It had to take a regime change for a new president to come in and undertake very radical reforms, because corruption currently in Uganda has become institutionalized, and the political leadership of our country, across the political divide, thrives a lot on corruption. So there are limitations in that regard, because you have people who are occupying very powerful positions who are thriving politically because of corruption. You have seen reports of like when there was and when they were changing the constitution to remove the presidential age limit. You know that money was given out to members of parliament. Even after the removal, again more money was given, especially to members of parliament belonging to the ruling party. So corruption has become part of our politics as a country, and it would need a revolution, a paradigm shift that would be caused by maybe change of leadership, or, you know, I usually give this example. I like it. In the kingdom of Uganda, there was a a king who did some soul searching, who was very cruel and did some soul searching and repented and changed his ways. He even changed his name from Pavia to Mutesa. So maybe the other option is for the leaders who are in government, in powerful positions, to do some soul searching and repent and become remorseful and make a commitment to end corruption. Because if they decided and resolved to end corruption, as long as there is political will to fight and end corruption, it would not even take a year before corruption disappears. You can imagine the number of security agencies we have, especially those that do intelligence gathering. Currently, much of their intelligence gathering is actually on political opponents who are competing with them, and maybe others to do with security. But if such resources, if such personnel could be deployed to investigate corruption going on in government entities, it would not even take 2 years for the country to achieve so much progress in both exposing and eliminating corruption that is going on within government. So, political will is very fundamental. But as far as the media is concerned and other players, of course, we've not done much, and our exposures and our work can also greatly help in reducing the level of corruption in the country. When we expose, when we speak out as different stakeholders, as the civil society, as religious leaders, our religious leaders have also not done enough in exposing and fighting corruption. And in many instances, they have also been part of corruption. I am sure you know about this. Many of our religious leaders invite many of these corrupt political leaders at their fundraisings, and they give them colossal sums of money for their construction projects and other projects, and that muzzles them and keeps them, it stops them from speaking out against corruption and exposing it. So there is a lot we can do as the different stakeholders. For the media, we need more capacity building for journalists to be prepared to specifically come up with a number of projects for fighting corruption and exposing it. There can be a fund that can be put in place by government partners. I've seen government partners raising funds for different causes. Government partners can put in place a fund for specifically funding investigative journalism because it is very expensive. And as I told you, many media houses are struggling financially. So if development partners can help us, or even the fund can be put in the national budget, the same way money is given to the IGG, to the Auditor General, to Parliament to carry out a watchdog role, oversight role, and fight corruption. The media can also be given some money to help in the fight against corruption. We need collaborations also between the civil society, the government partners, the media, parliament, and other players who are involved in fighting corruption to work together to share information, to share experiences and strategies on how to fight corruption. But we also have to find solutions to the issue of commercialization of politics, because commercialization of politics gives us an output of political leaders who are greatly corrupt, who are always looking for deals to get more money. And our voters have also worsened that challenge because they keep pressurizing our political leaders for money. There are so many pressures and demands on these MPs and political leaders. and that compels these people to always look for deals to get money to be able to meet the expectations of their voters. Otherwise, if they don't do so, they are not voted back. The attrition rate, like for members of parliament in the last parliament, was about close to 80. Close to 80% of the members of parliament didn't return. They did go back to parliament. So we need to find solutions to the commercialization of politics. ACFIM has been very passionate about this, has done a lot of research about this subject, and produced a lot of reports with recommendations. I think we need to revisit these reports and the recommendations. One of the recommendations was for an amendment, for amendments in our laws to make voter bribery highly risky and punishable. Um, like we've seen many members of parliament who have been thrown out of parliament after courts discovered that they bribed the voters. But after they have been thrown out and the by-elections are organized, the same people are allowed to contest. So if we had a law that bars such people from contesting again, that would greatly help. It would greatly help us. But we also need to ensure that civil society organizations and journalists and the other players, including those who are in state agencies that are fighting corruption, they need to be well facilitated, they need to be paid well so that they cannot be compromised by the corrupt. Because I remember when the former Speaker of Parliament, Jacob Olanya, was meeting the new IDD, one of his concerns from the reports he had got was that even the office of the IDD had so many staff who were involved in the corruption, and in the course of investigating the corrupt, they solicit for money and to write good reports about these people and cover up. Same thing happens in the office of the Auditor General, that so many people, staff who are involved in investigating corruption, in demanding for accountability, many times they are compromised and they cover up and they never write reports that expose failure to account for funds. Of course, the solution is not only in ensuring that these people are paid well, but also identifying people with integrity to do that kind of work. Because if you don't have people who are incorruptible given such duties, it becomes very easy to compromise them, even when they are significantly paid well. So that is another thing that, but of course, that is majorly for the appointing authorities, people who are responsible for recruiting, including the chief executive, who is responsible for appointing the top occupants of those offices, making sure that people who are incorruptible, and we have so many people in this country who are known to be people of high integrity. Those are the people that need to be given those responsibilities of investigating the corrupt who have a tendency to compromise those who are investigating them.
You talked of issue of political corruption being institutionalized in Uganda, and there are very many. Some people also do believe outside there that the media has also not survived, either being captured or co-opted by the regime or the government in power, and some of them don't believe that what media sometimes brings out is a true reflection of what really happens in some of those institutions. They just give us a glimpse and they leave most of the things. What is your say on this argument that media is being co-opted or captured by the regime?
Uh, Co-option is debatable, but like I said in the beginning, I told you there are so many stories that never come out to the public, that are never published. And that is partly because of the interference that happens that comes from those who are in authority. And because when you say co-opting, it would mean it's a government policy. But what I was talking about is that there are individuals within government. It may not necessarily be a policy of government. And I don't think it's a policy of government because there are so many people in government, including cabinet, even parliament, who are committed to fighting corruption and exposing corruption. But there are individuals within government who are corrupt and who will always make attempts to compromise the media, to compromise managers, to compromise journalists, not to expose corruption that is going on within government. So, like I told you, the limitations are there, but to a bigger extent, the media has played a very fundamental role in fighting corruption and exposing it. And that is why, even when it comes to the rankings internationally, those rankings are based on the reports that come out. So, the reason we could be doing badly as a country, as far as the rankings are concerned, is partly because so much corruption going on has been greatly exposed. I should also commend the civil society. The civil society has played a very fundamental role in exposing the corruption that is going on in the country, and that is why it could be one of the reasons why civil society organizations have been getting challenges operating in the country. They have been under so much attack by sections of people within government. That's what I can say on that, Mr. SL.
I know our time is fast spent, but I want you to also, as we conclude, uh, give us your thoughts on how best the media team can team up with civil society to bring bear to pressure on public accountability institutions to play their constitutional role.
That's a very good question, and that's an area, me even as a leader in the media industry, it is something that I have been thinking about, that we have not done enough to ensure that we monitor and follow public finances and ensure that the taxpayers' money is properly managed, properly utilized, and that there is value for money. We keep covering the national budget and indicate that so much has been allocated to these entities, but we've not been following them enough in the course of execution to ensure that public finances are properly utilized. And so, as the media, as civil society, even as parliament and many other stakeholders that are involved in fighting corruption, including development partners, because development partners are very passionate about this subject. I think we need to come up with a number of engagements, discourses to meet together and assess the progress made and come up with new strategies on how to work together and take the fight against corruption to another level. I am sure development partners will be willing to fund such initiatives. I told you, as far as the media is concerned, we also need a fund to be put in place to facilitate journalists who are involved in the investigative stories. Investigative stories are very costly. They take a lot of time and patience to be done, and the bulk of our journalists are freelance journalists. So if someone is not a staff, they do not have that patience to work on such stories. But when there is some facilitation for them to be given some special facilitation to work on such stories, we shall be seeing more stories coming out exposing corruption. So, as a way forward, we certainly need collaborations between the different players, the government partners, the civil society groups, the media, the different state entities that are given the responsibility to fight corruption, the Auditor General, the IGK, accountability committees of parliament have produced so many reports with so many recommendations. There are recommendations that have been made by the Office of the Auditor General, by the IGK. If we could sit down, all of us, converge like in a symposium, and we revisit all these recommendations and discuss the way forward, I am sure there are so many new initiatives and projects that we shall come up with that would greatly help us to take the fight against corruption a notch higher. Yes, that's what I can say, Mr. Isaac.
Thank you so much, Mr. Moses Mulondo, and thank you for your time for honoring our invitation to participate in this edition of ACFIM Talks. We have come to our tail end, and we want to also thank all those outside there who have been listening and watching us. This week's edition has come to an end, and we expect to have more of the discussions around public accountability and corruption in Uganda next week in another edition. Please keep tuned. It's ACFIM Talks. It runs every Friday from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. East African time. My name is Abel Ethel, and I want to thank you all for keeping in touch and keeping tuned with us.